60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 50% of Americans cannot live without a credit card. But what if I told you that all these people who are living on credit cards and barely making ends meet could possibly be a millionaire with as little as $140? They tell us that becoming a millionaire takes a lot of hard work. In some ways, it does. But there is a strategy that most people do not know that can easily turn you into a multi-millionaire with as little as $140. And here in this video, I'm going to show you step by step how you can do that. In fact, this is Warren Buffett's most favorite stock that could potentially make anybody who's watching this video a multi-millionaire. If you're ready, give this video a thumbs up and let's get right into it. If you look at your life, you'll see that you're consistently consuming things. You use your iPhone that is probably made by Apple. Then your smartphone has multiple apps such as Netflix to waste your time and Uber to call yourself a taxi. Your trousers probably made by Tommy, your hoodie probably made by another company, and then your sneakers most likely being made by Nike. And that's why these companies worth trillions of dollars. And every single year they continue getting wealthier and they continue making more money because they're paying focus on what can we possibly produce in order for people to buy that. So if you don't make that shift in your mentality and understand that you're only going to get rich and make a lot of money when you start producing more. We're all producers and consumers to a certain extent. You probably have a job, and when you go to your job, you're producing something. So you're getting money in exchange for producing that thing. On the other side, everybody is consuming stuff. You can't live your life without a smartphone. You probably have clothes on you and shoes. You eat 2 to 3 times a day and you're consuming. But the difference is that some people are entirely focused on consistently producing stuff, while other people are consistently being focused on consuming stuff. Why do people use credit cards? Because they want to consume something now because they cannot afford it. Why do people get an auto loan? Because they don't have the money to consume that car, so they get a loan. Why do people get a mortgage? Because they don't have the money to buy that house, so they get a mortgage, and so on and so forth. And everybody is focused on consuming a lot of things. So if you don't make that change in mentality, it's impossible for you to get rich. And a lot of people don't understand, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to make millions of dollars when the average wage is like $50,000 to $60,000? It will take me a lifetime before I build a career that will even pay me like $200,000 or $300,000, leave alone making millions of dollars. But you don't have to do that. All you have is to understand how the factors of production works. The factors of productions are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur is going to take these 3 things and is going to combine them together and build something of value that the society needs. So what do you think Apple is doing? Apple is using factors of production to produce iPhones, smartphones, iPads, and computers. Nike uses the factors of productions to get you the shoes that you want. Netflix is using the factors of productions to get you the entertainment shows in order to entertain you for $15 or $20 a month. And if you look at their valuations, you will constantly see that Apple made $50 billion, $80 billion, $100 billion. Their valuation went into $2 or $3 trillion because all they do is try to create as much as possible. On the other side, when people are focused on consuming cars, houses, food, computers, that's what makes you poor because you are destroying wealth. When you buy sneakers, you destroyed wealth. You use those sneakers. When you eat food, you destroyed that wealth that was created by some kind of a restaurant. And the problem with creating wealth is that your time is limited at the end of the day. How much time do you have in a day? 24 hours. You probably can work 9 or 10 hours in the best case scenario. You have to sleep like 8 hours a day, and then you have other things to do besides just sleeping, which means that you have to think differently. Instead of focusing to trade your time, which is a limited resource, you have to focus on controlling the factors of production. The best way to do that is to go and build a business. But that's a difficult thing to do. Most people don't have the skills, most people don't have the money, and most people are not ready to go through such a sacrifice in order to build one successful business. Even building a small grocery store in the corner is a difficult job to do, leave alone building a multi-trillion-dollar business or even a multi-million-dollar business. But what if I told you that there is a market where you can buy these businesses? You don't have to go and start an Apple. You don't have to go and start a Netflix. You don't have to go and start start an Uber, all you have to do is to take a portion of your income and buy those businesses. And as these businesses try to make money, and as these businesses go and build better shoes, and as these businesses go and build better clothes, they will start making more money, and you will profit as a result of the fact that these businesses worked super hard and made so much money. Can you own Nike, for example, that produces your shoes? Nike is a business that is being traded in the market, and you, like any other person, can go to the stock market and buy Nike. Not the Nike shoes, but the Nike as a company. And each time that Nike sells the shoes, you're eligible to the profits of that company. In fact, you're one of the owners of Nike. In fact, if you look at the people who own Nike, you'll find out that less than 2% of Nike shares are being held by the insiders. Insiders are the people who work at Nike, such as the CEO, the CFO, the employees of Nike. The rest of the Nike is being owned by Vanguard, that owns around 9.5% of Nike. BlackRock owns around 8% of Nike. You have State Street, you have Capital World, you have Goldman Sachs, you have Morgan Stanley. These are primarily Wall Street. So you can complain that Wall Street owns Nike. You can complain that Wall Street owns the factors of production. But just like Wall Street, you have the rights and you have the ability to go and buy Nike. As of the time of this recording, a single Nike stock worth around $76. And the place where all of these companies are being traded is called the stock market. In fact, that's where the stock market exists for. So buying businesses, in other words, or buying factors of production, also called as investing. When you invest your money, it's basically buying the factors of production. So if you're wondering why Wall Street is so rich, why all of these billionaires are getting richer every single year, because they're focused on buying the factors of production. They're not focused. Yes, they buy yachts, they buy watches, they buy smartphones, but at the same time, they allocate a portion of their income on buying the factors of production. Now, to simplify everything, instead of saying every single time buying factors of production, I will simply say investing. But there is two fundamental problems if you're investing. Number one is competition. How many brands are there that are selling shoes? You have Adidas, you have Lacoste, you have Nike, you have Puma. You have hundreds of companies that produce shoes just in the United States alone, leave alone all across the globe. How do you know that this company produces far better shoes? How do you know that this company produces the shoes that people need? How do you know which of these shoes companies are going to become much more successful? That makes it even more difficult for the average person to find out which factors of productions to buy, which company to invest his money. Because if you end up buying the wrong company that will not end up being successful, that you're going to lose your money. The second problem with buying factors of production is that how do you know if you're getting a good price? I know very little about cars. And if you get me a car, let's say some kind of a Mercedes that is being used by 2 to 3 years, I won't know what is a good valuation of that Mercedes because I don't understand engines, I don't understand tires, I don't understand the electronics of the car. It might look like a really great car, but if a professional will look at that car, he would tell me about all the problems that this car has, and it might not be a good idea to buy it, for example, for $50,000. The same thing with businesses. Even if a business is successful and they're making a lot of money, they're selling their products all across the globe, how do you know that this business is worth X amount of money? Over the last 3 years, Nike lost 56% of its valuation. So everybody who invested in Nike 3 years ago, they lost 56% of their money. And that makes investing even more difficult. And that's why the vast majority of people who get into the stock market, they understand that they have to buy the factors of production, but they end up losing because they don't know what is a good price for a particular business because they don't have the financial background. So here's a very simple strategy for lazy people to make millions of dollars without having a full financial background, without becoming financial experts. In fact, this is the strategy that Warren Buffett suggested. You see, there are around 33 million businesses in the United States, and it's very difficult to figure out which of these businesses are going to be successful. Even if you're good at business, even if you're good at investing, you cannot possibly go through 33 million businesses to find out which of these businesses are going to be successful. So let's come up with filters that would allow us to identify good businesses from bad businesses. And we are going to create a basket of businesses where we are going to invest our money. The first requirement is that the company should be public. If it's a private business, then they're not required by anybody to publish their financial statements. They're not accountable to anybody but themselves. So we don't know anything about that business. However, if it's a publicly traded company, then they are required by the SEC to show their financial statements. In fact, they must hire an auditing company such as Deloitte or KPMG to audit them so that you know that the financial statements they're showing you, so you know how much assets do they have, how much liabilities they have. They also must share with you their income statements. You know how much sales they made at the end of the last quarter. You know their operating profit. You know how much taxes they paid. You know their expenses. They also have to share with you their cash flow and a lot of other things so that we know if this company is a good business or a bad business. The second filter we want to put in is that they must have at least an $18 billion valuation. Now, $18 billion looks like a lot of money, but if you compare it to today's companies that are being valued at 2, 3, and sometimes up to $4 trillion, $18 billion doesn't look a lot. We also want that over the last 6 months, their share to be traded at least 250,000 times. And that will give us a liquidity. If a share of a company is being traded a lot, then we know for a fact is that if we purchase that company, we can easily sell it. What if we made a mistake? If nobody buys and sells that shares of that company, then if we bought that stock, we cannot possibly sell it because there are no sellers on the other side. But if a stock of this company is being actively traded in the market, we can easily buy it, we can easily sell it whenever we want. And at least the last 4 quarters must be profitable. Every single quarter, these companies that are publicly traded must share their financial statements. And we want to make sure that this company was profitable for at least the last 12 months or the last 4 quarters. So if we look at their balance sheets and we find out that it was profitable in the first quarter, it was profitable in the second quarter, but in the first quarter it was not profitable, but then it was profitable in the fourth quarter, we're going to ignore these companies because we don't know for a fact if their business model is sustainable. However, if they consistently make a profit, then we know that this business is stable and they have came up with the products that we know for a fact is being easily sold in the market. We also want our baskets to be diversified, so we want some stocks from every single industry. We don't want to be focused on one single industry. Yes, tech now is the largest industry. However, we also want some of our stocks to be invested in healthcare. We want some of our stocks to be invested in home appliances, in energy. And that diversified portfolio will give us exposure to all other industries, including the real estate. So if we have another financial disaster where the real estate market is going to collapse, we are safe because other industries are not going to suffer as much as the real estate. If the tech industry is going to go through a serious crisis, then we're also invested in the healthcare industry, and that will balance it out. And we want to automatically and consistently rebalance our portfolio. What happens if this company is no longer profitable? We remove it and we replace it by the next best option. What if this company is no longer as liquid as we want it to be? We remove it and we replace it by the next best option. What if one industry grows so heavily that it tries to overshadow other industries? We sell a portion of our stocks from that industry and we add from other industries. But this sounds like a very complicated strategy. It sounds like a lot of work. This is not something that an average person has the time to do that. But what if I told you that there are already companies who do that on behalf of you, and by investing in them, you are doing the exact same thing that I have told you. One of the famous stocks is the S&P 500 that is called VOO. Over the last 15 years, it has grown by almost 465%. And the job of the Vanguard S&P 500 is to invest in these companies consistently. And the company automatically rebalances their portfolio in order to be invested in the S&P 500. And the criteria that I have mentioned you are the criteria of the S&P 500.
I think it's the same thing that makes most sense practically all of the time. And that is to consistently buy an S&P 500 low-cost index fund.
So how much money do you have to invest in the S&P 500 to make $1 million? The more you invest, the more factors of production you buy, the wealthier you are going to get. But let's take the absolute minimum. If you are in your early 20s and you decide that you want to be a very lazy person, you don't want to start a business, you don't want to become ultra rich, all you want is to retire with $1 million. if you invest $140 every single month into the S&P 500 over the course of 43 years, let's say you're 22 years old and you start investing as little as $140. By the time you're, let's say, 65 years old and you retire, you will be invested $73,000 into the S&P 500. However, because the index grows by an average 10% annually, your $73,000 by that time will turn into $1 million and $55,000. So even if you know nothing absolutely about the stock market, you don't want to get into the hustle of the market, you don't want to learn about investing and become a professional investor and make millions of dollars like some of these people, you still can end up making millions of dollars by investing at least $140 every single month, which is the kind of money that most people can afford. Within the S&P 500, you have companies that grow very fast, like by thousands of percentages. And by investing in them, you could be making a lot of money. And then you have companies that don't grow much. And then you have the companies that fail. So on average, it grows by around 10%. However, if you're very smart about investing and you know which companies to invest in individually, you can make far more money than $1 million, even with as little as $140. Let me just give you a couple of examples. If you invested in Meta just 5 years ago, which was literally during the pandemic, your $10,000 today would have turned into almost $30,000. And that's with a single investment and just 5 years. But if you're much smarter than that and you invested in Palantir, for example, a $10,000 investment into this company just 5 years ago would have turned into $146,000. Literally, by $20,000 or $30,000 investment into one of these companies could actually get you a house today. A $10,000 investment into Nvidia in the last 5 years would have turned into $142,000. Now imagine if you turn this into a habit. And instead of consistently consuming things, you also keep buying factories of productions. What happens over the period of 5 years? What happens over a period of 10 years? How about 20 years? You keep getting richer. You keep getting wealthier. Your wealth continues to grow. And that's why there is a saying that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, of course, that is the most natural thing to happen in a capitalistic society, because rich people understand everything that I told you in this video, and they learn this when they're kids, and all they do their entire lives is keep buying factors of production. While the vast majority of people keep consuming things, and if they cannot possibly afford that, they will get into debt to consume that. So if you want to make that change in your life, this is what you have to focus on. And if you want to become a professional investor, then there is a link in the description of this video that you must absolutely check today to find out more. That's it for today. Thanks guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.